Underneath the glimmering city lights, where dreams are stitched together with golden thread, lived Victoria, a woman who seemed to have everything. Born into a life of privilege, she was accustomed to the luxury of designer clothes, gourmet meals, and lavish parties. Yet beneath her polished exterior, Victoria felt an emptiness she couldn't shake, a hollowness that wealth couldn't fill. One evening, while watching the sunset from her penthouse balcony, she wondered what it was like to live a life unburdened by expectations and appearances. And just like that, an idea sparked. Determined to find something real, Victoria decided to shed her wealth, at least for a while. Disguising herself as a struggling artist, she moved into a modest studio in a rundown neighborhood. Gone were the silk dresses and sparkling jewels. Instead, she donned faded jeans and paint-splattered t-shirts. Her days were spent wandering the city's lesser-known corners, searching for inspiration and maybe, just maybe, a hint of genuine human connection. It was during one of these explorations that she stumbled into a quaint coffee shop, its walls adorned with local artists' works. There behind the counter was Lucas, a barista with a warm smile and eyes that seemed to see right through her. He wasn't like anyone she had met before. With each visit, Victoria found herself lingering a little longer, captivated by his stories of travel and adventure, tales spun with passion and laughter. As the weeks passed, Victoria and Lucas grew closer. He didn't know of her wealth, only seeing the struggling artist with a fierce determination in her eyes. For the first time in years, Victoria felt alive. She'd laugh at his silly jokes, listen intently to his dreams, and for moments at a time, forget about the life she had left behind. One rainy evening, as they sat together under the awning outside the cafe, Lucas confessed his own struggles, the burden of student loans, the dream of opening his own art studio, and the fear of never being enough. His vulnerability tugged at Victoria's heartstrings, and she felt an overwhelming urge to help him. But how could she without revealing the truth? Her heart was at war with itself. She knew she couldn't keep up the charade forever, but the thought of losing the only real connection she'd ever felt terrified her. And then there was Lucas. What would he think when he discovered she wasn't the person she had pretended to be? On a chilly Friday evening, Lucas invited Victoria to an art exhibition, his first real step toward his dreams. As she admired his work, the depth of his talent took her breath away. But amidst the crowd, she spotted someone from her old life, a family friend who would surely recognize her. Panic surged through her veins, and before Lucas could notice, she slipped out into the night, her mind racing. That night, as she lay in her tiny apartment, tears streaming down her face, Victoria knew she had to make a choice. Continue living a lie or trust that Lucas might accept her for who she truly was. But was she brave enough to risk everything for love? With her secret teetering on the edge of discovery and her heart caught between two worlds, Victoria stood at a crossroads. Could love be strong enough to bridge the gap between her two lives? Or was she destined to lose the one thing money could never buy? The night air was cold against Victoria's skin as she hurried through the empty streets, her heart pounding. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had just made a terrible mistake. Hiding from Lucas, running away instead of facing the truth, it felt like cowardice. But what choice did she have? If he found out who she really was, would he see her as just another spoiled rich girl playing pretend? The thought of losing him, of watching the warmth in his eyes turn to disappointment, made her chest tighten. The next day she stayed away from the cafe, afraid of what Lucas might ask if he saw her again. She tried to convince herself it was for the best, that she needed to figure things out before facing him. But the silence felt unbearable. The small apartment, once a symbol of freedom, now felt suffocating. Victoria stared at her reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman who looked back. The messy hair, the worn-out clothes, the tired eyes. This version of herself was so different from the one she had been raised to be. And yet, she had never felt more like herself. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. A message from an unknown number. "You left last night without saying goodbye. I hope you're okay. You looked worried. Just know I'm here if you need to talk." Lucas. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen. He had noticed. Of course he had. Lucas was the kind of person who paid attention to the little things, who saw past smiles and into the spaces where sadness lived. But what could she even say? That she had been terrified of being found out, that her past life was creeping back in, threatening to destroy the one thing that had ever felt real? Instead of replying, she tucked the phone away and grabbed her coat. She needed air, needed to escape the chaos in her mind. As she stepped outside, she nearly ran into someone standing by her door. Victoria! Her breath caught in her throat. It was the family friend she had seen at the gallery. I thought I recognized you last night, the woman said, her voice laced with curiosity. What are you doing here? Your parents have been worried. Panic surged through her. She forced a smile, trying to act casual. I just needed some time away, that's all. The woman studied her, clearly unconvinced. Your father would be devastated if he knew you were living like this. Sneaking around, pretending to be someone else. What exactly are you trying to prove? Victoria's stomach twisted. She had spent her entire life living up to other people's expectations, being the perfect daughter, the polished socialite. But here, in this small, messy life, she had found something more, something real. And now that fragile world was on the verge of crumbling. Victoria felt her throat tighten as she forced a polite laugh, trying to mask the panic rising inside her. I'm just figuring things out, she said, shifting uncomfortably under the woman's gaze. Her family friend didn't look convinced. Does your father know? Your mother? The mention of her parents sent a chill down Victoria's spine. They had always expected perfection. No mistakes, no missteps. If they found out she had been living like this, pretending to be someone else, it wouldn't just be a scandal. It would be a disaster. Her father would see it as a childish rebellion, her mother as an embarrassment. They wouldn't understand. I'll tell them when I'm ready, she said quickly, her voice firmer than she felt. But please don't say anything yet. The woman gave her a long, knowing look. Then with a sigh, she shook her head. You can't run forever, Victoria. The words stayed with her long after the woman had walked away. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was all temporary, a fragile illusion that would eventually shatter. But that didn't make it any less real. As she wandered through the city, Victoria found herself outside the cafe again. Through the window, she saw Lucas laughing with a customer, his easy charm as effortless as ever. But there was something different. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Had she done that? Had her sudden disappearance left him wondering? Before she could change her mind, she stepped inside. The familiar scent of coffee and warm pastries wrapped around her, comforting and terrifying all at once. Lucas looked up, and the moment their eyes met, she saw the flicker of surprise. Then something else, concern. You disappeared, he said, his voice soft, but laced with something unspoken. I'm sorry, she murmured, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. Something came up. Lucas studied her for a moment, as if deciding whether to believe her. Then, with a small nod, he gestured to a seat by the window. Want to talk about it? Victoria hesitated. She wanted to tell him everything, to let him see the parts of her she had kept hidden. But how could she, when the truth might ruin everything? As she sat down, her phone buzzed again. Another message. We need to talk. Your father is looking for you. Her chest tightened. The walls she had built were closing in, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if she could outrun them. Victoria's fingers hovered over her phone, her breath shallow as she read the message again. Her father was looking for her. That could only mean one thing. Her secret was slipping through the cracks. If he found her, everything she had built here, everything she had tried to become, would be ripped away in an instant. Lucas was still watching her, waiting for her to say something. The concern in his eyes made her stomach twist with guilt. He had no idea how close she was to losing everything. She forced a smile, shoving her phone into her pocket. It's nothing, she said, trying to sound casual. Just a message from an old friend. He didn't look convinced, but he let it go. For now. Victoria stirred her coffee, her mind racing. She needed a plan, a way to stop her past from crashing into her present. Maybe she could talk to the woman who had recognized her, convince her to keep quiet a little longer. Maybe. The cafe door swung open, and a chill ran down her spine. Two men in suits stepped inside, scanning the room. Her pulse pounded in her ears. They weren't just customers. She knew exactly who they were. Her father's men. They were here for her. She ducked her head, gripping the edge of the table. The walls of the cafe suddenly felt too tight, the air too thin. She needed to leave. Now Lucas noticed her shift and frown. "Victoria, are you okay?" She nodded quickly, but her legs felt frozen beneath the table. If she ran, they would know. If she stayed, they would find her. The men moved toward the counter, speaking quietly to the barista. She saw the barista nod and point toward her. Panic shot through her veins like fire. Her breath came fast and uneven as she grabbed Lucas's hand without thinking. "Please," she whispered, "I need to get out of here." Lucas's eyes widened, but he didn't ask questions. Without hesitation, he pulled her up, weaving through the cafe with purpose. He led her through the back door, out into the alley where the cold air hit her like a slap. "Victoria," he said, breathless. "What's going on?" She turned to him, her heart pounding. This was it, the moment she had been running from. She couldn't hide anymore. But could she tell him the truth, or was it already too late? Victoria's chest tightened as she looked into Lucas's eyes. He deserved answers, but where could she even begin? That she wasn't just a struggling artist, but the daughter of a powerful man who controlled everything in her life. That the people looking for her wouldn't stop until she was back under their control. She opened her mouth to speak, but footsteps echoed in the alley. The men were close, too close. Lucas grabbed her hand. "Come on!" Without hesitation, he led her through the maze of back streets, weaving between dumpsters and fire escapes, until they reached a quieter part of the city. Only when they stopped to catch their breath did he finally turn to her, frustration flickering in his eyes. "Victoria, tell me the truth," he demanded, his voice low but firm. "Who are those guys?" She swallowed hard. She had spent weeks building something real with him, but now it was slipping through her fingers. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed again. She hesitated before pulling it out, but the message on the screen sent ice through her veins. "If you don't come back now, we'll make sure Lucas regrets helping you." Her stomach dropped. Her father's men must have figured out who he was, and now he was in danger, because of her. Lucas must have seen the panic in her face. "Victoria, what is it?" Her hands shook as she shoved the phone away. "I have to go," she whispered. He grabbed her wrist before she could turn away. "Number, not like this." Tears burned at the back of her eyes. "You don't understand. If I stay, they'll come after you." His jaw tightened. "Then let them. I'm not letting you face this alone." A lump formed in her throat. She wanted to believe he meant it, that he wouldn't walk away once he learned everything. But she knew what happened when people got too close to her world. They got hurt. Before she could argue, a black car rounded the corner. The tinted windows, the slow crawl of the tires. It was them. Panic surged inside her. "Lucas, you have to go. Please." But he didn't move. He just squared his shoulders and took her hand. "Not without you." Victoria's heart pounded. This wasn't just about her anymore. If she didn't act fast, Lucas's life would change forever, and not in the way he deserved. The black car came to a stop just a few feet away. The doors swung open and two men stepped out, their expressions unreadable but their intent clear. Victoria's heart pounded. There was no escaping this. Lucas tightened his grip on her hand. "We're leaving," he whispered. But before they could move, one of the men raised a hand. "Miss Lancaster, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Hearing her real name spoken so plainly sent a shiver down her spine. Lucas stiffened beside her. She could feel his confusion, his mind piecing things together. "Lancaster," he echoed, looking at her. She couldn't lie anymore. "Lucas, I—" Before she could explain, the man took a step closer. "Your father just wants you home. He's been patient, but that patience is running out." Victoria swallowed hard. She knew what that meant. If she didn't go willingly, they'd force her. And Lucas, he was now caught in the middle. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Fine," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll go." Lucas grabbed her arm, shaking his head. "Number Victoria, you don't have to." She turned to him, forcing a small, sad smile. "I do. It's the only way to keep you safe." But just as she took another step, Lucas did something she didn't expect. He stepped between her and the men. "She's not going anywhere with you." The men exchanged a glance, one of them sighing as if bored. "This isn't your fight, kid." Lucas didn't back down. "It is now." For a moment, everything hung in the balance. Then, just as one of the men reached into his coat, Victoria did the only thing she could think of. She turned and ran. "Victoria!" Lucas shouted, but she didn't stop. She darted down the alley, forcing herself to move faster than she ever had. She had no plan, no idea where she was going, but she knew one thing. She couldn't let them take her. But then, just as she reached the next street, another car pulled up. The back door opened, and sitting inside, calm and composed, was her father. "Enough game," he said. "Get in." Victoria froze. This was it. She could run forever, or she could face the truth. But before she could decide, Lucas appeared beside her, out of breath. "You're not alone," he whispered. And in that moment she realized. Maybe she never had been. Victoria stood frozen, staring at her father. His face was unreadable, but she knew better than to mistake his silence for patience. He was done waiting. Lucas was still beside her, his presence steady and unwavering. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the unspoken question in his eyes. Was she going to surrender, or was she going to fight? Her father sighed as if exhausted. "Victoria, this is ridiculous. You've had your fun, but it's time to come home." His voice was calm, controlled, but she heard the warning beneath it. He wasn't asking. He was telling. For so long, she had let him make the decisions. She had lived in the world he built for her, followed the rules he set. But standing there, feeling the warmth of Lucas's hands still on hers, she realized something. She wasn't that girl anymore. She straightened her back. "No," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I'm not going back." Her father's expression didn't change, but she saw the slight shift in his posture, a flicker of irritation. "You think you can just walk away from this family, from everything I've given you?" She swallowed hard. "I didn't ask for any of it." Lucas stepped forward. "She doesn't need your money. She doesn't need your control." Her father's gaze flickered to Lucas, assessing him like he was an obstacle rather than a person. "And you think you can protect her? Take care of her?" Lucas didn't hesitate. "She doesn't need me to. She can take care of herself." Something about that answer made Victoria's chest tighten. Lucas wasn't claiming to save her. He was saying she was strong enough to save herself. Her father exhaled slowly, then leaned back in his seat. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Maybe," she admitted, "but at least it's my mistake to make." For the first time, her father looked at her, really looked at her. And then, with the smallest nod, he reached for the door. "Don't come back," he said. And just like that, the car pulled away. Victoria let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Lucas turned to her, a small smile playing on his lips. "So, what now?" She looked up at him, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. And for the first time in a long time, she knew exactly what she wanted. "Now," she said, "I start over.